All right, so in this video, a few weeks before Donald Trump left office, um, I think for more than half of his term, he fought against the 1619 Project, created by the New York Times in order to make available a lot of education about the arrival of African slaves to this country up until present day, basically Black history unfiltered, so that it will be available for different curriculums, whether it be in elementary school, middle school, high school, college level, grad school, for people to utilize to educate people. It's not something that's mandated, but it's a hot topic today because a lot of Republican senators are already trying to lay the groundwork for the Department of Education in various different, red states to block the teaching of this. So Donald Trump tried to start something called the 1776 Commission to combat that, which would, basically be the history of America that we've all learned growing up in, public and private school in America, um, from elementary all the way through college, but even more sanitized than that. So we were discussing that. So it might seem a little bit dated because it actually was recorded, I think in January. So it's not new, but we've been sitting on it for a while, and I just thought with the actions that a lot of GOP lawmakers are taking in order to, silence the 1619 Project, which is, basically unfiltered and uncensored full truth in the history of, African Americans in this country from the first slave arriving in 1619. So without further ado, the 1776 Commission. So I'm gonna just focus in on like the slavery part of it.
All right. So this is how we're doing right now. I'm gonna go. I just heard about this right now.
So
So
just to give it like a background, he created like a commission because, like, as I've said before, a lot of the stuff about like history, Black history, American history, it's a lot of stuff like they don't teach you in schools. A lot of the things I had to learn, like the stuff that I'm very like learned about, I had to go outside of school to learn about. Case in point, Martin Luther King, right?
mhm.
Everybody tells you like, oh, he did this stuff, he was peaceful, da 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 da, and like he had this I have a dream speech, the March on Washington, and he was killed in 1968. But like nobody fills in like the gaps, and up until I did my research on it, like they never really talked about like what he was doing when he got killed. Like he got killed in Memphis because he was going to march with like the sanitation workers to help get them like health care and higher wages and basically better treatment by the the sanitation department in Memphis. And this was like black people, white people, all kinds of different types of people, and they left that part out whenever they talk about him. You just assume it was just racism that killed him, and it was just like a radicalized white guy that killed him, that like assassinated him. But then you find out, I think it's Early Ray was his name that killed him. Like the
It's always two names. It's always two first names. John Earl Ray or something. James Earl Ray. No.
no, that was
I
James Earl
usually
Jones. But the long and short of it is like
happy 90th birthday, James Earl Jones.
the long and short of it is when you get out of school, you do your research, and then you come to find out that the King family sued the government of the United States for being liable in his death because they sued him and then they won because you know like the guy he kind of didn't do it because he wanted to do it. Like they believe like the FBI had basically, and this is common knowledge now because of the internet and basically this 1776 commission that Trump was trying to do, that he commissioned before he left office. They was trying to basically stop like this knowledge from getting out of here, like how powerful white supremacy was. And then you look at another person, Fred Hampton. He was assassinated by the Chicago PD as well as the U.S. government and infiltrated. And one of the people that infiltrated him, a movie's coming out next month, be on HBO Max, starring Daniel Kaluuya from Get Out and Black Panther, and Lakeith Steinfield. I'm from Atlanta. I'm from Sorry to Bother You, Brother. Jesse Plemons is in it as the FBI agency agent, and basically, it's based on a true story because Fred Hampton was assassinated by the police and assassinated by the FBI, and the U.S. government. He was a Black Panther, and he was basically rallying the people of Chicago, like the poor people. He was starting to get the poor people together, and that was one of the things that Dr. King moved on after the Civil Rights Act. Like he was starting to get all the poor people rallied up, and it's crazy how like America, as long as you gave black people like pieces of rights and human rights and civil rights, like that was good enough. But once you get all the poor people to get together, black, white, Latino, Asian, Native American, all of them people together, like you're to the U.S. government during this time, maybe even today. That remains to be seen. Look at all of them people that's getting rounded up for that capital that were part of like the National Guard and part of different law enforcement agencies. But once you start getting those people together, like you're like a national threat. Like they always try to like paint the Black Panthers to be like this like black supremacist, like basically like the black version of KKK. And it's like when you and I always thought that way until I did my own research, and you come to find out like they were basically educating black people and impoverished areas around the country. They were feeding black children because back in those days, like, if you couldn't afford lunch at school, you basically didn't eat. And if you can't eat at school and you're still starving, what do? Not go to school. So these are things like you had to go and do your research on, like on your own. And
Right.
essentially, I think it was the Jesus Christ, I forgot their name, but it was a group, and they got together with the New York Times and different news organizations, and they were basically pushing for all of this information to be taught to kids growing up so that they didn't have to be like me or you, where like I know some of this information I'm dropping on you, Mike, is probably like the first time you're hearing this, right?
Well, in a way,
I mean, not all of it, but
the
some
whole
of it.
thing about
Yeah.
yeah, I knew, like every 30 years, like in the 30s during the Depression, and then like 30 years prior to that, I know all about the union because I grew up in a union household, so I know all about the history of the unions, and it was blacks, like other uh ethnicities coming from Europe and everything coming over here. They got together, they got trampled, but they also got their rights. And then like 20, 30 years before that, like in the turn of the century of the 20th century, same thing happened. They got they got some rights, but they also got like in the meantime there was like, the big riots and stuff, like in the beginning of the auto industry and stuff like that in like the teens. But like the whole thing with the bare bones history is what we were taught in school, like MLK, they always say like what you said exactly, and then he was assassinated and everything. They didn't say what he was doing at that time.
Hmm.
They just do like they didn't even mention like the early 50s either. They don't mention all they do is like they pinpoint the whole speech. They don't mention like the earlier late 40s, 50s. It's very very bare bones history, which is what we grew up on. Even just other history that has nothing to do with just everything is like one line, two lines, three lines. But yeah,
Yeah, and like I've told you before, like the one of the first like long books like I've read in my life, and it's probably my favorite book is the autobiography of Malcolm X. And up until I read that book and did my research into Malcolm X, like you was always taught in school like MLK good, Malcolm X bad,
mm.
and those two didn't
Militant,
like
black
each
militant.
other. Yeah, and like that
Mm.
they were adversaries. But in reality, like I'm not gonna like you can't say like they were best friends. Like they only physically met each other like twice, but they definitely worked together a couple years before Malcolm X was assassinated, and they obviously had the same some of the same ideas, but they just kind of had like certain differences in opinions about going about things. But like I'm saying, like this 1776 commission, they were brought on to combat this other commission because supposedly this is according to Trump. I'm paraphrasing here, but he said like that organization was basically is basically trying to teach kids to hate America, and it's like no, you have to learn about America because that's the only way we're gonna get better. But to make this like squeaky clean, it's like taking out like the curse words out of a CD. Like they're trying to like take all of
Mm.
the bad parts out of like American history just to make it seem like America was always this great place. And I was it's literal like pun intended, it's whitewashing. So one of the things that came out,
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
no, like even like even after like in the earliest days of like the Washington, and then we have the like we'll get into it eventually in our episode about the transition of power. They were still loyalists to the crown, but they were also like semi with like being our own like home rule, which is like Canada and like other parts of the world. But other people were like straight up 100% like anti the crown, but they were still like they don't mention that type of stuff in history either. It just says like we had the war and then Washington and then the presidents and then this and then this. It's very very bare bones history, which is
Yeah, and
I love reading about the other
and
like
I actually like
random stuff.
I read the other day like during like the Battle of Gettysburg, like Robert E. Lee led Confederate troops into Pennsylvania, right? And
Mhm.
they would capture African Americans, free African Americans, and take them, kept them as captives, and then take them back to the South and like sell them into slavery. And this is the same Robert E. Lee that Trump, we talked about after the Capitol riot. His law was to keep all it was created to keep all of these Confederate statues of Robert E. Lee. And you come to find out Robert E. Lee he during the Battle of Gettysburg, he rode into Pennsylvania, captured free black people and tried to take them back to the South and sell them back into slavery. But not even sell them back. It's sometimes people that were just born free and you'd capture them. You seen 12 Years a Slave, take them back and like turn them
You
into
know,
slaves. But the thing about slavery, this was the one thing that came out that I saw, and it was basically I tried to find the exact paragraph, but I couldn't find it. But I saw in like the New York Post, they had the blurb in their response to slavery in that it shouldn't have been held against the founding fathers because virtually all the different countries around the world were doing slavery, and it's like so their basic defense for slavery is like, well, everybody was doing it, so you know
yeah, I
it
think
doesn't make us bad.
UK well, the UK was doing it like if you want to focus on certain groups, they were doing it well and doing it in India up until like at a certain point. They had like slave labor in Australia, but they were like prison. It was a penal colony, but they were like they were pretty much slaves for at like indenture service and all that. And then the UK, the abolitionists, early abolitionists were in the UK, but at the same time they had like lower class British and like Irish immigrants working in the coal mines, like like up until during the Civil War too. Like so, it's very very it's a gray thing to do if you want to talk about black and white. But with American history, and it's sad because I think a lot of the things are going to get less detailed. It's going to get more and more broad with the history. Uh, Especially, well, hopefully it will change now. But in the last 4 years, a lot of the history books were getting Betsy DeVos. Everything was getting more and more corporate, and I'm just trying to get more and more broad. Just teaching this curriculum, just like not like asking more questions, just telling us like what we need to know. Like here's this and here's that. So that's interesting to know. I didn't know like anything about this. I know there was that what is it, the 1619? The other thing that
1619.
happened like 4 years ago.
This is
Yeah,
1619.
that
That was what the
yeah
76 commission was
was like
made
combating.
to combat. Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember that was the whole story. Basically, and but I was talking about Virginia again. Talking about like that's very people say like Eurocentric. That's also not even that was even a country yet. It was just very this area centric because we also had Brazil. You have other parts of the world. Like I was saying, like India too, man. Other places around the world too had very similar stories. But well, we talk about things that are focused to more in the Northeast. Like you also have things like out west with like the native indigenous people and everything. So there's so much history, and like how do you not leave things out? You know, that's the thing. Like like you have to be in school now until you're like 24 to know like everything, or you go on your own,
You
get a job,
can't
and then you
you
learn
can't
stuff on your
leave
own on the internet. Can't.
you can't leave things out. Like history, what's the phrase? History repeats itself.
Repeats itself.
But
Yeah.
you have to learn
You're
from
you're
history.
doomed to repeat it. You're doomed to make the same mistakes, that type of thing.
So like just to wrap it up, like my idea of it is that the 1776 commission, you see what happened 2 weeks ago at the Capitol. Like that was a whole bunch of like white people, and it was like some non-white people that they would have been in this group. I mean, not that I would have been in this group, but their children, if the 1776 commission had their way, when people who are looking at history and do their research and learn all the facts, they're getting together and they're saying like, yo, listen, like this is slavery happened. These were the effects of slavery. This is how Jim Crow affected us. This is how this is how segregation made society the way it is. And these are things we're supposed to change. Like it would have been this group of people that now you're cherry picking. I mean, not even cherry picking, like apple picking, taking big chunks of history out, like the tragic parts of it, and try to make it seem like it was all like some kind of like 1950s Walt Disney movie of how America came to be. Like those are the people that get pissed off because they're like, all right, like all of this stuff is fantasy, and it's like, no, like what you're trying to create is a fantasy, and this is why these people feel these type of ways, because it's a lot of like a whole lot of these white supremacists, and like I said, it were black people there. You could tell by their lineup that they were not done by black barbers because they're not really black. And
Hey,
um,
hey, maybe. Hey,
that's
it's
how that,
quarantine, man. Come on.
that's
I'm
how
joking.
yeah, that's how something like what happened at the Capitol happens because of stuff like that. Like
Also,
people trying to like
we mentioned
whitewash
Robert E.
history
Lee,
and make it how they want it to.
but also Robert E. Lee. He's northeastern educated. He was educated. He went to school in West Point. He was from the north, and then like he's from the south, but then he went up north, got educated and everything. He went back down there and was pretty much hired to be like a general and all that shit like that. And he like very similar to the people that were in the failed insurrection. They were elitists. They were not not what they were representing, like the rural white. Like they were like on first class flights. They got pulled off for first class flights. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like it's not really it's false narrative. That's the whole thing. Oh, that's it. False narrative for the history books. That makes sense.
Yeah. So when we talk about like the inauguration in episode 36, check out the podcast. We're gonna get into a lot more of this stuff in there, but I just wanted to talk about the 1776 commission and the whitewashing of history.